In July 2011, the body of 32-year-old Rebecca Zahau was found hanging from a balcony at a Coronado mansion where she lived with her boyfriend, millionaire pharmaceuticals tycoon Jonah Shacknai. Her boyfriend's brother, Adam Shacknai, reported finding her body, which had been gagged with a t-shirt and bound at the hands and feet. A strange message was scrawled in black paint on the bedroom door. She saved him, can he save her? Zahau's death came just days after her boyfriend's 6-year-old son, Max, suffered a traumatic fall at the mansion, one that was ultimately fatal. His death was ruled an accident, hers a suicide. But many, including Zahau's family, don't believe that she took her own life. They believe she was murdered. And although no criminal charges have been filed in the case, the Zahau family has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Adam Shacknai. A civil trial is now underway in San Diego Superior Court, and we are following it. For the San Diego Union-Tribune, I'm Lauren Flynn. This is Under the Gavel. Week 4 of the trial has concluded, and we were lucky enough that Pauline Repard, our court reporter who's been with us throughout this case, she was in court with us all week. Usually Pauline doesn't work on Mondays, but this week she worked on her day off in order to see Adam Shacknai testify. Pauline.
Yes.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. Let's just get right into it.
Yeah.
The most intriguing, I'd say, the most intriguing day of trial happened on Monday.
Right. This was kind of a big week almost every day. But yes, Monday was a day that a lot of people were waiting for when Adam Shacknai was called to the stand by the plaintiff's attorney. So in a civil case, you do have to testify, even though it may seem like it's against your best interests, where, of course, in a criminal trial, you couldn't be forced to.
Okay.
But Adam Shacknai was called to the stand and was on there for several hours, pretty calm, pretty good at just answering the questions as he was asked and not floating off into other directions.
What kind of stuff was he asked?
Well, he was asked very directly by the plaintiff attorney, Keith Greer, whether he harmed Rebecca, whether he tied her up, whether he hit her on the head, whether he harmed her, whether he killed her. It was kind of a big barrage of questions that were hit all at once. And each time, Adam Shacknai said, no, I did not, absolutely not. And just, answered very simply to each one. And then when his own attorney, Daniel Webb, had a turn, Mr. Webb asked him also directly, did you kill or harm Rebecca Zahau? Did you do anything to participate in her death? And he said, most certainly not. That
was the key phrase there that was highlighted in your story.
Right. He said that a few times.
Yeah.
Most certainly not. So, it's not a surprise that he's going to be denying this.
It would be the last thing in the world I would have expected for him to just be like, yeah, I totally did it.
Right. Yeah. This would not be the time that would happen.
Right.
More or less.
Did anything particularly unusual or striking happen?
Well, he was asked, about his 911 call to police, and that call was played, a tape recording of the 911 call, and he sounds pretty distraught. He has kind of an odd use of words. He says, I've got a girl here. She hanged herself. And actually, he said in the guest house, which is where he'd stayed the night, where in fact she was hanging from a balcony on the main house.
Right.
And
but the guest bedroom, so, and you're, he's in a pretty distraught state.
Right.
It's understandable.
Then he stays on the phone with the dispatcher while he runs into the kitchen to get a knife, and he climbs up on a table and cuts her down and says he's giving CPR, and the dispatcher keeps asking, what's your address? What's your address? I can't send anybody if you don't tell me the address. So he runs around the front of the house to get the house numbers, runs back, and meanwhile, he's still got his cell phone going, so you can hear him while he's running. And then then they transfer him to a fire dispatcher who talks him through CPR compressions and breaths. And so you hear that for a while. He's counting the number, and then he's not, and the dispatcher's saying, "Are you there? Are you there?" And then meanwhile, the medics have arrived, and so he disconnects the phone at that point. There was a little period where you hear some kind of rickety clackety noise while he's dragging a wooden table across some pavers to get closer to her, and you can hear one of the legs actually fall off and hit the pavement. And he said in testimony that he had to stick the leg back on in order to climb on the table. It had 4 legs, and then the scene photos show the leg off again. I think he said it fell off again after he climbed up there. Mr. Greer did make mention that the distance that Rebecca Zahau was hanging below that balcony, to him, didn't seem like it would have been high enough for Adam Shacknai to really need a table to climb on to reach up with a knife and cut the rope above her head. Mr. Greer said that her feet would have actually been dangling only like about 2 feet above the ground, and she was not a tall woman.
So that's like 7 feet off the ground. He's 5'11". How long are my arms, Pauline? Because I'm about 5'11". Like, could I reach?
Yeah, I don't know. Men's arms are usually longer than women's too, but we didn't have any exact measurements in court. Nobody was testifying to exactly what those measurements were. So in a way, it didn't really go anywhere. I mean, Mr. Greer made a point of it, and Adam Shacknai, he didn't really pin him down too much on just how high above his own head it was.
Adam was also asked about his family and his background.
Right. Yeah.
What happened? What happened there?
He talked about his childhood. He and his older brother Jonah being very close, even though they're a number of years apart in age, and that his mother died when Adam was fairly young. That he went off kind of in his own path to work on the Mississippi River, first as a deckhand, and as he grew in experience, he came to be a certified pilot and captain by rank. So apparently he's good at what he does. He's done it for a number of years, and his brother, of course, went off into a totally different track to become a multimillionaire in the pharmaceutical industry. Right. And Adam said that he's had a girlfriend for more than 20 years, a woman named Mary Bedwell. He said he never brought her to any family functions. He would often go to family gatherings for different holidays, but he never brought Mary with him because his parents wouldn't have approved the fact that she's not Jewish. So I don't know any more about that family dynamic, but he said that she and he agreed that that's just how they would do things. They also had agreed that they weren't planning to get married even after all these years. Yeah. Mr. Greer raised a question about their relationship and said, she's not really your girlfriend, is she? And Adam Shacknai surprised everyone in the courthouse by looking out into the courtroom audience gallery and calling out, "Mary, are you my girlfriend?" And the woman sitting among all the people said, "Yes, I am."
Weird.
And it caused a little stir. I mean, people behaved themselves, but, it was certainly an unusual event. And I think the defense attorney and the judge did not know what to make of this sudden testimony from out in the gallery. And
why did Keith Greer ask about, or why did he question the legitimacy of their relationship?
Well, that never came out as to what his point was that he might have been trying to make. And in fact, the scene kind of carried along. The judge became very animated about what this woman was doing there? And was she a potential witness? And if she is a potential witness, why is she sitting in the courtroom listening to other testimony, which the judge did not want to be happening? The defense attorney said, Your Honor, no, she's not a witness because she's not on Mr. Greer's witness list. And in fact, Mr. Greer had said that Adam Shacknai would be his final witness before he rested his case. Mr. Greer indicated that maybe she would be a witness, possibly.
Interesting.
So the judge ordered that she be out of the courtroom then the rest of the time. And he did not call her. She was not called as a witness. But that's kind of where all that ended. It was quite a little commotion.
Adam didn't want to introduce Mary to his family for fear that she wouldn't be accepted because she was a Christian and he's Jewish.
Right.
But Rebecca is said she was, told her family she was a Christian.
Right. And Jonah was certainly dating her. I don't know how much their parents knew about that.
Oh, okay. Do you have any idea, like any speculation of why that would be relevant to this case?
Not any legitimate opinion of it. He might be trying to raise the idea of a guy with certain frustrations that might lead him to want to attack a woman who's alone with him on a property. Nothing else that Adam Shacknai testified to raised any specter that he had a history of violence or abuse toward anyone.
Adam was asked about what happened the morning that he found Rebecca's body.
Right.
And what did he say?
Yeah, the police certainly asked him everything that he had done. And based on those conversations, he was asked in court to detail exactly what he did and what time. He said that he showered before he went to bed the night before, and just to kind of get the airplane travel dirt off of him. And then he said he'd showered in the morning as well. And Mr. Greer sort of asked him, why he needed another shower and what else he'd been doing. And Adam Shacknai had to admit on the witness stand that he had been engaged in self-pleasuring masturbation and looking at porn on his phone. And so there was quite some discussion about that.
Right.
He frankly said he was killing some time that morning. That was his answer as to why he was doing that. So yeah, it had to be an embarrassing time on the stand to admit doing that. And again, when an attorney asks questions, they don't follow up to explain to everyone in the courtroom why they've just asked that question. You have to wait for the closing arguments for them to knit their case all together like that.
So dramatic.
Yeah. But he did say, did you shower in order to clean off the residue of what you had done to Rebecca Zahau earlier, implying a sexual assault. And of course, Adam Shacknai said, no, that is not why he showered. So by the questions, the plaintiffs get their case mentioned and explained a little bit at a time. So again, that kind of goes to the theory that Adam Shacknai was sexually aroused that night, acted on it, killed Rebecca afterwards, and then took these showers to wash away any evidence of that. He said after all that, then he got dressed and he was going to head out and go to a local coffee shop, just walk there. And when he walked out of the guest house, he said out of the corner of his eye, he saw something that just didn't seem right, and then realized that it was Rebecca hanging from the balcony. He says he got on the 911 on his cell phone right away.
Right. God, what a terrible thing.
It would be a pretty horrific thing to discover in the morning if this is the last thing on your mind.
Yeah. I don't think I ever really thought of it from like that point of view. I just thought of it as from like a Law and Order point of view of like, we're seeing the outside of him and not in his head. So I think I just like put myself in his shoes if that's actually
right. If you presume that he's innocent of any wrongdoing, then it's just a horrible thing.
Terrible.
And on top of the other reason that he's there is because his brother's child is dying at the hospital.
Did anyone else testify on Monday?
Yes. Keith Greer did rest his case. Adam Shacknai was the final witness for the plaintiff's case, so he's put on all the evidence that he's got to try to support his contention that Adam Shacknai killed Rebecca Zahau. So the defense started on their case. They had actually taken one of their witnesses out of turn the week before, but this was the real start of their case, and they called a sheriff's homicide detective who had been called out to that scene the morning that Rebecca was found and reported. And this detective's assignment was to go door to door and look for any witnesses that had heard or seen anything amiss in the night. And she found one woman who reported having heard a woman scream in the night. And that statement has gone around and around. It's been widely reported that a woman's scream was heard, and people who believe that Rebecca was murdered believe that scream was her being assaulted and beaten before she's strangled. However, this detective continued to testify that on later questioning, after the detective found no one else in the neighborhood who'd heard that she'd pieced together that it was probably some children playing out toward the front of the houses. Yeah. And the woman agreed that is, in fact, probably what she'd heard. Right. So the detective was satisfied that there had been no woman's scream in the night.
And it's totally possible that it's the middle of summer. Kids don't have to go to school. They're out late. They're playing. Right. Somebody's going to scream.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if they found those children or if somebody else said, well, I know there were children playing. But certainly other neighbors could hear kids screaming during play and immediately forget about it, not even notice it.
Yeah, because it's a normal thing.
Right. If it didn't raise any alarm that a child was being harmed.
Right. Moving on to Tuesday. Yeah. The headline of your story says that one of 3 claims in the lawsuit has been dismissed. What does that mean? Right. That was kind of a big deal for the court day and a win for the defense that day. The wrongful death lawsuit had stated 3 points. They're called causes of action, and one was as the whole case is called, a wrongful death. Right. That somebody took a life wrongfully. Right. The second one was battery, that she'd been strangled and beaten on the head and so on. The third cause of action was called conversion, which means taking somebody's property and using it for an inappropriate or wrong thing, to misuse somebody's property. Okay. You might imagine maybe grabbing up somebody's heavy tool or piece of equipment and hitting someone with it. It could be a misuse of their property. Okay. In this case, Mr. Greer explained that the property he was alleging was misused was the long-sleeve blue T-shirt that was found wrapped around Rebecca Zahau's neck and part of it stuffed into her mouth. Right. And Adam Shacknai had testified that he had to pull that away in order to try the CPR breaths on her, but it was still more loosely around her neck when the authorities got there. Greer was asked whether he had evidence and proof that T-shirt belonged to Rebecca Zahau, and he literally stopped short, like he hadn't considered that before, and told the judge, no, I don't have any evidence, proof, or witnesses that was her shirt. Wow. So the defense asked that particular point of conversion, wrongful use of property, be dismissed out of the lawsuit, and the judge agreed that since there was no evidence pending as to that it was Rebecca's, then you can't prove that it was hers that was misused.
there was a second issue that's always, again, been out there in the general reporting on this case about the dress that Rebecca was wearing the day before.
Right.
And her little sister took a picture of Rebecca at the airport when Rebecca took Zena to the airport. And it was a pretty distinctive striped dress that was of a sparkly fabric. And then she had a little gray, looked like a lightweight sweatshirt over it. And people have been reporting all these years that those clothes were never found.
That's what I heard.
That it was a mystery of, how they could disappear. The defense looked at more of the crime scene evidence photos taken by the sheriff's department and saw that there was a photo of the master bedroom closet, and on the floor of that closet was a heap of clothing. And when they made a close-up of that clothing, the striped dress was clearly in that heap, and so was the little jacket.
Yeah.
And they showed a blow-up in court so that we could all see it, and a really tight blow-up showed that striped material in the closet was sparkly. And it seemed completely conclusive that that's where the missing dress was, is right in the closet where you might expect something to be that was used once or however many times, and then put in the heap for laundry.
Now, my question about both all three items of clothing then. Well, first, was the sparkly dress a part of the claims in the lawsuit, or is that just another?
It was sort of implied too in the conversion that it was both pieces of clothing that were wrongfully used, and that was supposedly a big mystery of where would her clothing disappear to, and and how could, even on the theory that Adam killed her, where did he take that dress to? And you could imagine that there was evidence of the crime on that dress.
Totally. And if someone had killed her and gone out of the way to dispose of her clothing in such a way that they were never found again, who's to say they didn't also dispose of gloves or other towels that they wiped down their fingerprints with? But if those are there, then it seems more plausible that the gloves and the imaginary hypothetical gloves and other things don't exist either, or weren't disposed of with that dress because that dress is there. That's my theory. That's me connecting the dots, at least. I don't know if that's official.
Right. Well, one can certainly imagine all kinds of clothing and evidence disappearing under that theory.
Right.
There's no evidence of it. So a jury that's looking for evidence of something wouldn't find that.
My second question is, so now that has been dismissed, what does that mean for the case or the lawsuit?
In a way, it doesn't mean a great deal. The wrongful death and battery are certainly far more serious than, what did you do with a dress?
Right.
So those are the primary allegations here, and those stand, and the jury will be asked to look for whether there was evidence to support those allegations, those causes of action.
Is the conversion, though, is that used, did the plaintiffs use that as a way to sort of like support the wrongful death? Or is it like there's, they want X number of dollars and here are the three things they want it for? And is so now that conversion is out, let's say the plaintiffs win this case, does then the amount of money go down?
Not likely. Okay. I think that the plaintiffs would argue for to compensate the family, the mother and the sister, for their loss, lost support. Rebecca did occasionally give money to her parents, her mother, for support. Emotional distress of losing her, those sorts of things. And certainly there would be an argument, that you've got to punish this person. And the only punishment hand in a civil case is money. So if you believe that Adam killed her, what price do you put on Rebecca's life? So the hope for the plaintiffs would be, a considerable amount of money. If for no other reason that the cost of this case for the plaintiffs is enormous, bringing in all these experts from across the country, paying them very large hourly fees to sit in San Diego and to be on the stand and to stay overnight, those sorts of things.
And I'm assuming Keith Greer has been their attorney for years now. Or they've paid attorneys for years trying to get this case to go to court.
Right. The defense did ask for the other causes of action to be dismissed as well. The judge did not go along with that. She thought that there was enough evidence for a jury to have something to chew over and decide on with the wrongful death and battery. That there had been enough question from the knot tying and the handwriting experts, and other, knives and blood and that sort of thing, that there was something there for a jury to decide. Otherwise, the judge could have dismissed the whole thing right there. After they were done with discussing the actual lawsuit itself and dismissing the charges, then the next person to testify was the sheriff's lead forensic evidence technician. She took something like 12,000 photographs of the crime scene as well.
I saw that she was at the scene for 24 hours straight.
Right. Yeah, I guess most of the crime scene evidence people were there from, the call was made at 6:30, and so everybody started assembling after that, and they worked straight through the afternoon and night into the morning. Wow. They testified that they left the guest bedroom for last. They did the courtyard first, and so it was after midnight when they were finally working in that guest bedroom, collecting the evidence.
She also she talked about the blood on the knife that has previously, the plaintiff's witnesses have suggested was menstrual blood because there were no cuts found on Rebecca's body anywhere.
Right. None that would account for enough blood that would be on that knife. This forensic evidence technician agreed that there was blood on the handle of that, but she disagreed that the only possible source had been menstrual blood. She said there was an oozing burn wound on one of Rebecca's fingers, and it did clearly show up in the sheriff's evidence photos, a close-up of quite a black burn on there. And this expert said it was oozing still at that time. Whether it was oozing enough to have been on the handle, and Mr. Greer questioned her of why, if you were holding a knife naturally, how would a little blood on the inside of your middle finger get on the very, very end of the handle, that you wouldn't normally be putting the handle of a knife between your fingers in that manner. So there was no solid explanation. Obviously, this woman couldn't explain exactly how that could happen, other than just handling a knife, that it could happen.
That's interesting. Who else did we hear from on Tuesday?
There was also a sheriff's criminalist who collected evidence. His specialty is trace evidence, which means footprints, shoe prints, car tire prints, chemical traces, fiber, hair, in arson, fire debris cases, that sort of thing. So he was asked to testify about the balcony floor, which was very dirty. And he said he was able to clearly see two sets of bare footprints on the balcony, and two that were just on the balcony from the door of the room, and another set that were closer to the edge of the railing. He also discovered the boot print that was pretty quickly identified as belonging to a certain Coronado police officer. investigators have said that the footprints seem to indicate that she'd, with her feet bound, had stood at one point on the balcony and then hopped forward to put herself near the railing, and that it was mostly the toe prints that were seen in that second set, which would suggest her rising up on her toes to go over. And then the last thing that happened that day was a tape-recorded deposition, a videotape deposition of Zahau's former husband, Neil Nalepa. And he described how they had met in Bible college in Austria and how they eventually married. They came to the United States and moved about to several cities, and he discussed that she was having extramarital affairs in several of those cities. And that a couple of their moves were prompted by that, so that she could get away from this other person and they would make another attempt at making their marriage go. But it was clear from his line of discussion that the marriage was definitely faltering after a while, that they kept trying and they would get back together and move again. They lived in Colorado and Washington and Pennsylvania and Arizona and all different places before they divorced. He also said that he thought money was very important to Rebecca because she had been raised in such poverty that she was very concerned about having the money that would mean security to her, mean food on the table and so on. The implication there would perhaps be why she would choose a very wealthy man for her next relationship.
Yeah. And the extramarital affairs kind of paint a picture of a less than ideal woman.
There was also testimony from a fingerprint expert. It was at the time the sheriff's latent forensic print examiner, fingerprint examiner. And so while the defense team has been saying right along that no fingerprint evidence, no DNA put Adam with any of the pieces of evidence, this latent print expert was the one who got on the stand and verified that as testimony. And that was, in fact, her testimony, that she's the one who dusted the surfaces in the bedroom, dusted the bed where the rope was tied off to, dusted the balcony doors, dusted the door frame leading into the bedroom, dusted knives that were found in the bedroom, and of all the prints that she lifted off those surfaces, not one of them belonged to Adam Shacknai, but Rebecca Zahau had at least one print on virtually all of those surfaces and some more.
She also said that she found fingerprints and that many of those prints belonged to Rebecca.
Right.
Did she say who else the fingerprints belonged to?
She found no other matches at all of the prints that she lifted that day, that some were not usable, that you just couldn't tell whose they might be, but she didn't positively ID any third parties at all. A few that seemed almost usable, she thought were usually good for one of Rebecca's fingers or another, but couldn't be sure of it. So
she didn't find Jonah's fingerprints or...
Right. And she powdered things that she thought would have been used by somebody doing the things that were done, tying the rope around the bed. So she dusted the areas of the bed frame, which was metal, that she thought a person might logically touch, and the door frame too. She most definitely, as she said, did not dust everything in the whole house.
It's a pretty big house.
Right. It was a big house,
27
and
room mansion.
Not every room seemed involved with the death.
But I would imagine she would do like door handles.
Right.
Front door handles, side door handles, in case there was any sneaky third party coming in.
Sure, although she wouldn't have had anybody else's to compare it to.
Right.
It would have just been an unidentified print.
Yeah.
So one of the other issues with her discussion was that Mr. Greer asked whether she found evidence that surfaces had been wiped down, and she mostly said she did not. Where the fingerprint dust powder stuck to things, it was because there was some kind of moisture or something there, and if it had been wiped down, the dust wouldn't have stuck, and she didn't think that any surface she dusted looked like it had been wiped off ahead of time to remove any of the damp or sticky surfaces that powder would adhere to. And it's after she puts the powder on, then she looks to see if there appears to be a fingerprint to be lifted, and then she would do that with the tape, and then she puts the tape on a card to preserve it. So there was a big issue about one of the balcony doors, and the edge of the door had an area of maybe a foot high in which the powder did not seem to have stuck very well. In the photographs, it looked quite white compared to the surfaces above and below that area, which were black with powder. And she said she couldn't tell from those photos whether there might have been very small particles of black powder that adhered there and just weren't visible in the photograph. But there was also a different surface embedded in that edge of the door frame, which had to do with the locking mechanism, the little metal plate that would have been inserted into the door when the lock was installed in there in the door handle. So she agreed that the dust powder would probably adhere differently on a metal surface from the wood around it. Keith Greer did get her to, I guess you could say, admit that it was possible that area had been wiped off before she powdered it. She didn't believe it with her expertise. She didn't think it had, but she conceded that it was possible. And that was a big concession that he gained out of her on that one. And the door handle, too, the knob had no powder that was obviously sticking to it. There was one very bit of interesting drama in a certain chef's knife that has been seen in court quite a bit. And the plaintiffs have said that the placement of Rebecca Zahau's fingertips on that knife indicate that she must have held it behind her back, perhaps trying to saw the ropes off her hands. Those fingerprints had been labeled by one of the plaintiff's fingerprint experts to show which fingertips each mark belonged to. The sheriff's latent print examiner absolutely contradicted at least one of those prints and said the other one was wrong, that a place where it was supposed to be an index finger was clearly Rebecca's little finger. And it called into question then how Rebecca really was handling that knife and the blade, and therefore to what purpose. The defense theory has been that the knives were up there because Rebecca used them to cut the rope into the lengths that she wanted to accomplish tying up her own hands and making the noose. And the implication being that one of the knives didn't work well to cut through, so she went and got a second knife to do it. So anyway, that was interesting that this expert contradicted the fingerprint analysis of the other.
Thursday, I would imagine, was also an interesting testimony. Right.
Yeah, that was another big day that people were waiting for. Rebecca Zahau's boyfriend, Jonah Shacknai, was called to the stand. He is Adam's older brother. And the defense called him to talk about the family relationships again, and how and when he met Rebecca, and how and when he divorced his wives, what relationships they all had. The bottom line for him was that he absolutely did not believe his brother was capable of a violent act like that. He said that would be inconceivable, that Adam would do such things. he had, insights into Rebecca that had not been presented before. When Rebecca's mother and sister testified, they spoke a lot about her strong Christian faith. She had gone to a Bible college, and the mother said that they would sing hymns together on the phone and talk about their faith. Jonah had a little different view of her, that she was a little more complicated than that she really didn't regard organized religion highly, and only went to church a few times during their relationship. So we don't know if that signified any change, or whether Rebecca just did these things with her mother in order to please her mother, even if she didn't feel strongly in those ways. And Jonah Shacknai also talked about some disharmony within their relationships. His two older children from a first marriage were teenagers, and they were not getting along with Rebecca as, a new person in the family, especially apparently the teenage daughter was not coming to terms with having Rebecca in her life. There had been other testimony, deposition, that Dina Shacknai had said that the kids did not like Rebecca's strict food regimen of health foods, and they weren't used to that, and they didn't like it.
As kids do.
Right. And apparently there were conversations in which the teenagers were not very respectful to Rebecca, and that had worried Rebecca, that she was not happy with that. Jonah also talked about the fact that he owned boats, and that Rebecca would go boating with him, but he thought about the only knots she would have known related to boating was to tie the boat up when it was at dock. Nothing very complicated. And when he was shown the knots that were used on her hands, he said he did not think she would know those kind of knots, based on the very simple maneuvers that she would have used.
Right.
Jonah, of course, was asked about the morning that Rebecca died. He said that he had gotten up, and his brother calling him and saying, "Come back to the house, Rebecca's killed herself."
What terrible!
So he's left knowing that his son is dying, and that his girlfriend has died at her own hand, presumably, at that point. And he reiterated he absolutely did not believe that his brother had anything to do with it, that it would have been completely out of character for him to do anything violent like that. So that ended this week of testimony with him, and it resumes Monday.
Who do we expect to hear from next week?
We're expecting the then Chief Deputy Medical Examiner, Dr. Jonathan Lucas, who would have been in charge of the autopsy on Rebecca Zahau. So that should be a pretty big day in court also. The defense will ask him to walk through why it was that he came to the conclusion Rebecca Zahau killed herself in such a bizarre manner. And I'm sure Mr. Greer will use the opportunity to ask him, to justify those conclusions.
Anyone else we can expect?
That's all I know. There may be one or two follow-up defense witnesses, but the defense did say they expect to rest their case this coming week as well. It'll be a short court week. The judge was not available on Thursday, and they have not been in session on Fridays. So our understanding is they'll probably do their closing arguments the following week.
Okay. And then jury deliberation will start?
Yeah, then there'll be a lengthy period of the jury getting instructions on the law and how they are to review the evidence, and how are they to conduct themselves, and how do they fill out the verdict forms. And then it'll be in their hands to go in a room and decide what they decide. And in a civil case, you don't have to have 12 in agreement like you do in a criminal case. They could have a 10-2 decision, and that would carry. And also the standard of evidence is not as strong as in a criminal case, in which they have to decide that the evidence is beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
And not sit there and imagine that there were gloves that were never found, or imagine motives, or imagine other people. They can't use their imagination in a criminal trial. They're not supposed to just imagine and make up scenarios in a civil case either. But the standard is the preponderance of evidence.
Right.
So if they were to look at the evidence and say, gee, so far 50% of the evidence persuades us that Adam is guilty in this wrongful death, 50% persuades us that he's not, but there's one little bit more of evidence that slides onto one side or the other, and that's all they need for 10 of them to see it that way.
Fascinating.
It is indeed.
It's getting even more interesting. We are getting even closer to the end, and I'm looking forward to it.
Right. It's definitely a cliffhanger at this point.
Oh gosh, totally. Well, cool. Pauline, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
See you next week. Each week, Under the Gavel will dive into the details of the trial. We'll also have stories on our website, SanDiegoUnionTribune.com, each day court is in session. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date. And if you can, please rate and review this podcast. It would really help us out and let us know what we can do better. If you have any questions, comments, information, notes, anything, please feel free to email me at lauren.flynn@sduniontribune.com. This week's Under the Gavel team includes myself, Lauren Flynn, as executive producer and editor. Reporting is by Pauline Repard. Our artwork is by Gloria Orbegozo and Christina Bivik, and John McCutcheon is our editorial director. For the San Diego Union-Tribune, I'm Lauren Flynn. Thanks for listening.